And in we go to hour 3 of the course. All right, so what do honeyports buy you? It gives you visibility. Honestly, if you're looking at like current intrusion detection, intrusion prevention technologies, they really don't do very well with an attacker communicating over existing normal protocols, especially if those protocols support some level of, I guess, encryption associated with it as well. And they're also kind of effectively blind at detecting zero-day attacks. So we have to constantly keep that in mind. So what we do with a honeyport is if anyone interacts with that honeyport, we can pretty much say, like point blank, that this was malicious. We just had a question about the labs. Somebody said, I saw the Windows lab directory. We have one for app directory and sysmon. All the other labs are on the ADHD VM and the ADHD usage document on the desktop. And it opens up full step-by-step instructions for all the labs within ADHD. So hopefully that answers your question on where you can actually find those. So yeah, this gets you flexibility. We can run it from the command line. We can run it from Python. We can do it PowerShell, the class. We have a PowerShell version. We talk about a Ruby version. We got the command line version. I even do one from the command line on a Windows computer system without PowerShell because I hate myself. So we have all of that basically built in. So when we're looking at this in the enterprise, you should sprinkle these everywhere. Find your servers that are probably lower risk servers, maybe web servers that are pretty static. Don't set it up on like, critical infrastructure of like, yeah, I'm going to set this up on an AS400. That's a career limiting move. Don't do that. But set it up in your environment in a number of different locations. And this can cause little to no impact on production as well. There are some issues with vulnerability scanning. And what you need to do is create firewall rules for your vulnerability scanner to allow that to go through without tripping the honeyport. And it's also unlikely that they could DOS your systems, but that requires TCP sequence number prediction. And that's very, very, very hard to do. But now let's say that you really hate an attacker. Let's say that you want to get to the point where you're just going to make the attacker's life pure hell all the way through. How would you actually go about doing that? Well, there's a couple of different things that you can do. One of the things that you can do is just simply block their IP address, and that's kind of fun. But what we want to do now is we want to kick that particular technique and tactic up a couple of notches. Let's say we want to lie to them. Now, whenever you blacklist an IP address, getting a call from 5:15 a.m., that's only happened once, Kent. Boy, you call one tester at 5 o'clock in the morning and everything just goes crazy. If you just block an IP address, it's very easy for the attacker to then try to, identify that something has gone wrong. But what we want to do next is we want to really bog down their ability and their visibility into what's going on your computer system. And that introduces us to a tool called port spoof. Now, what port spoof does is it doesn't just create a tripwire, but it creates a full smoke screen against an attacker where it lies to them about what the ports are that are open on that system, but it actually goes a little bit further. It gets down to the point where it lies directly about the service behind that specific scan. So this is kind of an end slide from the lab that we're going to be doing here in a couple of seconds. Imagine if every single port was open on a computer system, but let's also imagine further that every single port was open and every single service had a proper service banner associated with it. So whenever you're looking at service banner identification, tools like Nmap, and even you can do it with Netcat, they'll go to a port, and then that port sometimes will respond back and say, I am an SSH server. I'm an SSH server and I'm okay. But it'll basically interrogate that service to identify exactly what that service is. And Nmap uses a file called the Nmap fingerprints file to do that type of analysis to identify what that service is. So what would happen if we grab for each port a random service identification fingerprint, and we're able to throw that fingerprint back at Nmap? And that gets us to our next lab with port spoof. So I'm going to go over here to ADHD, and we're going to walk through the port spoof lab. Now, for this particular lab, I'm going to have both my VMs up and running. I have my ADHD Windows VM is running, and my ADHD 3 Linux virtual machine is running as well. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the instructions. Do that over here. And I'm going to go to port spoof, and we'll go through the instructions specifically for port spoof. Okay. Then I'm going to open up a command prompt where we're going to set port spoof up over here. Right. So we have them both set up and ready to go. Now, port spoof is interesting. What it does is it creates IP tables rules that redirect traffic that's coming through on a specific port to a port of your choosing. And in this situation, port spoof lives and runs on port 4444. Now, whenever you run this in your environment, you're going to want to set this up so your computer, you're not going to use all ports against the system. You're going to want to set it up so it's a subset of ports, because setting it up on all ports will take a while. So getting my handy dandy pen and paper, because I'm going to need it here in just a second. And we're going to use the all-powerful copy and paste. But before we do that, if you notice my command prompt is a $ here, I need to be root. You can tell because I have a pound prompt as my prompt there. So I'm going to become root, and the password is ADHD. Now I am root. So somebody was making Groot jokes a little while earlier, and I just thought that was hilarious. So I'm going to take this IP tables rule, and what it's going to do is it's going to take all traffic that's coming in on this computer system and any and all ports between 1 and 65,535, and it's going to redirect it to port 4444. So if anybody tries to scan or connect to this particular computer system, they're going to get redirected to port 4444. Now, what's listening on port 4444 is going to be port spoof. So I'm going to fire up port spoof. So now it's just open port mode. I mentioned earlier that somebody was talking about TCP wrapped, and you're going to see something very similar to that here in just a second. Now I'm going to open up another terminal, and I'm going to get my IP address. And my IP address for this system is 192.168.229.128. I'm going to write that down. I got 192.168, and then I'm going to go 229.128. And you should write that down too. That is going to be your Linux system's IP address. And once again, if your VMs are not running, if you don't have it downloaded, don't panic. You're going to get access to this video, and you can do this. Now, DGINSBUL brought up, what about connecting to legitimate servers? If you have a legitimate port, you're going to want to make sure that it's excluded here. I'm doing 65,535 ports just because, I don't know, we're just going to hit everything. But for the purpose of this, you might want to create a smaller block. It doesn't create that small of a network block on this. By the way, your virtual machines for their network settings should automatically be set up so their network address translation, so they're able to talk to each other as they come out of the box. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to open up a command prompt, and I'm going to run it as administrator for my Windows system. I'm going to right click, I'm going to run as administrator, and I'm just going to ping my Linux system to make sure I can actually connect to it. 192.168, oops, 68, what did I have? 229.128. All right, so we've got that set up, and I can ping. Hooray! So that's good. So now what I'm going to do, there we go, CLS, there we go, is I'm going to do an Nmap scan. And this is really, really, really important. You're going to need to really limit the port scan of your system. You're not going to want to scan all ports, and you'll see why here in a couple of seconds. So I'm going to do Nmap, and I'm going to give it a port. We're going to go ports 1 to 10. There we go. And then I'm going to put in the IP address of 192.168.229.128. I'll let that run. Takes a couple of seconds for it to respond back. And it's going to come back, and it's going to say those ports are open. There we go. So now Nmap comes back, and it says that these ports are open, right? So it came back, and it says port 1 is TCP MUX, and it says we got compressed net, we've got unknown, RJE, echo, discard. But here's the deal. Nmap didn't actually interrogate these ports. So it's guessing that the services are like TCP mux and Echo, Jargon, Code of the Day, all those. It's based exclusively on the port number. If we actually go to just like a full SV scan on this computer system, it's now going to try to interrogate what those services are. Okay. It's going to take a couple of seconds here. Now notice how it just changed the response, right? It just came back and now it's saying, okay, well, the port is open. I'm getting a SYN-ACK back, but I've got TCP wrapped. Okay, what's going on there? So what's going on there is right now port spoof is running in kind of a dumb mode. It's just going to respond back that those ports are open. And there's absolutely some value in doing this. We were doing a pen test against an energy company, and we found their SCADA ICS network, and we were just trying to ping inside that network. And their firewall was set up that, oh yeah, you need to restart your VM, folks. If you didn't restart your VM, you still have those IP tables rules in play, and that's going to break it. So restart your Linux VM. So isn't this obvious to a pen tester? Galen asked. Yeah, it is. This kind of sucks, right? But let's keep talking about these pen testers for a couple of seconds, and let's talk about how we could really mess with the attacker as well. So here we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill port spoof. I'm back on my Linux computer system, and we're following the directions that are on the desktop ADHD usage document, right? And we've already went through and we did our Nmap scan from a different computer system. And now we actually want to give it a service fingerprint file. So now I'm going to copy this command, this example2. We're going to copy this command, right, in example2. Now we're going to go back here. We're going to paste that in. There we go. Now we're going to reflect that signature file back. Somebody mentioned IP table space -F. Yeah, you could do that. There's a number of different IP tables, chains, and rules here. And it's just a habit I've gotten into with my class, just to have people reboot. It's just easier that way as well. But we do have a port spoof GitHub here, which is cool. All righty. So now let's go back to our Windows computer system. And I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. Maybe I'll be able to zoom. Here we go. I'm waiting for magnifier to open up. There we go. Could you guys tell me if Zoom actually worked here? I'm asking just because it'll zoom for me, but GoToWebinar doesn't zoom. Awesome. So now we're going to rerun our scan. All right. So now I'm going to do a scan. I'm going to do a standard Nmap scan on ports 1 to 10 against my Linux IP address. And let's see how this looks differently. So the SCADA ICS system, they were actually running Fortinet, and it basically created a total smoke screen. So it was way, way, way more difficult for us to successfully identify what was a real port and what wasn't, and what was a real service. Because everything that we checked, everything was coming back as an open port on that computer. So it makes things more difficult, right? So there we go. So now those ports are still open, but now watch what happens whenever I do a full version scan against those ports. The first thing that's going to jump out at you is it's going to take a long time. I probably screwed up with doing just 10 ports. And let's see if we have a timer. Let me kill this and let's do a timer here. All right, kill it, kill it, kill it. There we go. All right. So I'm going to get my watch and I'm going to set up a timer here. And we're going to start talking. I don't want to load map data. Please don't load map data. Stop. Clock. We're going to do stopwatch and go. All right. So there our scan kicks off. Our stopwatch is going. So now what's going on behind the scenes is actually really, really, really important. So somebody had mentioned, what about a pen tester? A pen tester would see those ports were open and they would automatically think to themselves, well, something's amiss here. And that's true, all right? It's absolutely true, right? So we've got the stopwatch going. Ogum's like, just put the time command in front of the command. I could, but it's much more dramatic if I have a stopwatch. So the reason why this matters is because whenever you're running a scan, whether it's a port scan or it's a full service scan or it's a Nessus scan, there's the time between the attacker launching the scan and then the time when the attacker basically starts to panic a little bit. There we go. 52 seconds, about a minute. Stop. All right. So we have 52 seconds. So now what's going on is that service file is now being reflected back at Nmap. So it's trying to identify what the service is by interrogating that specific port and interrogating the service, and it's getting a fingerprint back. So here it's saying port 1 is FTP. Oh, it's a perception light serve FTP daemon. CompressNet, maybe. HTTP Edimax print server. This one is a Creston MC3 automation system. That's good. MRock music player. Discard. And then we also have these services that Nmap doesn't even recognize anymore at all. It's like, well, here's the service fingerprint for this. I don't know what that is. All right, so what does this mean for us? Well, there's a couple of interesting things. One, we've created that smoke screen. Being able to differentiate between real services and fake services is going to be difficult, right? It's going to be difficult. And if you got ports 1 through 10 is closed on your system, number one, make sure that your system rebooted. Number two, make sure that port spoof is running and your IP tables rule is running properly. So now you're getting this fake results back to the attacker. And then we get into the really, really interesting question of time and math. Quick, to the calculator. All right. So now we had, I think it was 1 minute to be able to scan 10 ports and identify the services. And what do we got? We got ethical hacker was asking a question. So if we do 65,536, because that's truly the number of ports that you have, we divide that by 10, because we just did a batch of 10 ports. We have 6,535 and change batches of 10 ports, right? And if it takes 1 minute to do 10 ports, we're going to time that out by 60 seconds. So there we go. And we have 393,000. And if we divide that by 60, this is what we come up with the minutes. It's going to take 6,553 minutes. And I may have screwed this up because I suck at math. I always rely on my wife to do this. So it's going to take 6,000 minutes to scan one system if we actually went through and we set this up. I mean, we divide that by 60 again. 109 hours? So let's back up. An attacker tries to scan a computer system. I'm sure I screwed up on that math somewhere. So an attacker is trying to scan a system, right? And it's now going to take them hours to scan one system. An attacker absolutely can look at this and they can totally go through and say, oh yeah, well, they're clearly doing this weird trickery on my computer system. But what's going on is it's going to take about, I don't know, 6-7 hours for the attacker to realize their scan is stuck, especially if they're scanning multiple systems. If they're scanning like 1,000 computer systems, it's going to take them about 5 to 6 hours to be like, something's not right here. Something is very, very, very wrong here. And then it's going to take them even longer to figure out, okay, what do they got to do about it? What do I do with my Nmap or my Nessus scan to be able to stop this insanity? By the way, does anybody know what the right answer is? If you're running Nessus and you hit a system like this, how do you actually like stop your Nessus scan without losing all the previous results for every single system that you've been scanning? So you drop this one turd in a punch bowl, right? And they're scanning thousands of systems. They hit this one computer system, which causes Nessus to freeze, seize up. How do you actually get your Nessus scan to stop appropriately without actually losing all of your scan results? It's a weird trick. You could try Control-Zing it, but then that kills all the results that you have. And then you're back to trying to go through your log files to parse out all of the vulnerabilities that are discovered up to that point. Set a time scan per host. Yep, absolutely. Before you get there, how much time is it going to waste on the system? There's an easier way. You could pray. That's not it. Hit your computer desk. Now, if you're going to exclude the IP from the scan, that requires you to restart the scan. So if you scanned 1,000 systems, are you going to rescan 1,000 systems? Warlord got it. Drop the network, shut down the interface, or simply unplug the network card. What happens is as soon as Nessus or any of the vulnerability scanners lose network connectivity, you'll see them go through and say host is down, 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 and then it'll give you a final report of everything that it found at that particular point. So just killing the interface. Very good. Awesome. Very, very cool. So now we go back to the detection time plus reaction time must be less than the amount of time it takes for an attacker to attack your environment. And you can see how tools like port spoof really will start drastically increasing the amount of time it takes to successfully identify and attack computer systems. So yeah, the stream is definitely a little bit behind, and that happens with GoToWebinar. So with this in mind, you can see how this greatly increases the time. And also, this gets into a fundamental difference between a pen tester and an attacker, right? So a pen tester will get annoyed, they'll restart their scan, they'll hate you, they'll curse you, that's fine. But a real attacker has one rule. Does anybody know what the one rule is? So as a real attacker, if you're a nation state attacker, what's the first thing they drill in your head when you come through the door and you start doing attacker stuff? What's the very first rule that they tell you? Very first rule is don't get caught. Don't get caught. Because if you're burnt as an attacker, if your techniques are burnt as an attacker, there's a tremendous amount of money that has to go into trying to rebuild entirely new infrastructures. And if you're burnt as an individual, you're done. So your number one rule is don't get caught. Now, if you know as a targeted determined attacker that your number one rule is don't get caught, as soon as you go into an environment, and this, wash your hands. I'm not going to argue with that. Yes, wash your hands. I'll up that one as well. If you're an attacker and you're going into an environment that appears to have these types of traps, how does that change your approach to that environment? How does it change your tactics as well? So we'll move on here. We've got that as well. So what happens is if you're an attacker and you get into this environment and you're doing cyber offensive operations for a nation state and you believe that they have some method of detecting what you're actually doing, or you believe that they're using these types of honeypots, one of two things happens. Either A, you are told to stop attacking that network, or B, you move very, very, very slowly in the rest of your attack tactics. You have to be very, very, very quiet. So we go back to detection time plus reaction time and attack time. Now the attack time has gone through the roof, or the attacker has just left as well. So just some ways to think about it, right? All right, now let's talk about Honeytokens. So this tool that we want to talk about is Canary tokens. And I love this tool. Some people had talked about, actually, wait a minute, I'm going to stop for a second. OC Cam brought up a great point. OC Cam, awesome. I'm going to give that a thumbs up and a smiley face. And can I give him like 100? There we go. I'm going to give him 100 because OC Cam brought up a great point. Go to Fiverr and hire someone to do it. And I'm giving him thumbs up, not just because it's funny, because it is. But what we're actually starting to see nation state attackers do, and this is starting to get in the public domain more, is they're not actually launching the attacks directly from their own environment. They're actually hiring different organized crime organizations to do their bidding for them. And this is a really interesting kind of mercenary style approach to doing cyber offensive attacks at a nation state level. So fantastic, very, very, very good OC Cam. Very solid. So we're going to talk about implementation of Canary tokens. So Canary Tokens is a website you all can go to. And we're going to talk a lot about this. So Thinkist really took the idea of cyber deception a number of years ago and just ran with it, especially on the attributional side of the feds. And they've just done an amazing job at creating this free utility. In fact, we were working on a commercial tool that was going to do something very, very, very similar for attribution, and Thinkist actually just beat us to the punch. You can add more cyber attribution into these things and do it better, which is great. But honestly, what they gave away for free is amazing. And by the way, I have a soft spot in my heart for any company that has commercial products and they give stuff away for free. So just hat tip to these guys. They're absolutely amazing. I like the Netscape quote. So we've got Netscape. You picked up on the Netscape one. What's the DNS one? Anyone know? What's the picture for DNS? Anyone? See if anybody can hit it. Who is that is the question, and what is his association with DNS? So that's my question while I go on to the slides. So what Canary Tokens does is it allows you to run it in two ways. One, you can run it on their servers, which is what we're going to do for the lab that we have coming up here in a little bit. Yes, it's Dan Kaminsky. Now, why would they have him on? Why would they have him associated with DNS? Can anybody find the Wikipedia article and come up with it? So why is he Mr. DNS? So the idea is you can run this from their servers. You can also take it and you can implement your own servers. So you can stand all of the, you can stand up the entire Thinkist Canary token server on your own. It requires you to set up a DNS server and doing things like that, set it up so it works, but it's amazing, right? So let's start at the beginning. Let's say an attacker is doing recon against your organization, right? So if you have an attacker that is doing recon and they're trying to find out vulnerabilities or they're looking for cloud vulnerabilities against the organization, they're going to try some things, right? And one of the things that the Canary token server has, there it is. He actually has his own Wikipedia article. That's cute. Yep, the DNS vulnerability in 2008 was epic. It was funny. Dan Kaminsky has this quote that he's given in a number of presentations. Whenever he found this vulnerability and he talked it over with his girlfriend looked at him and said, "Oh my God, you just broke the internet." And yes, he did. So Dan Kaminsky is amazing, just a fantastic security researcher. So what you can do is you can actually create fake AWS keys. So a lot of you got started today, getting started by using S3, and a whole bunch of people's like minds melted, right? They're like, holy crap, you know, we got to use S3 buckets and we got to use CyberDuck or S3 Explorer or any of these different tools to try and, you know, get this file. And it's like a whole new way of thinking things. It's not FTP, it's not SSH or SCP, and it's a new way of dealing with it. Well, if you remember in the news, and I'll talk about this more in a little bit, it's very, very common for attackers to attack S3 buckets. And they specifically attack S3 buckets by finding these keys, right? We got the AWS access key, and then we also have the AWS secret key. And attackers will find this out in like GitHub, and they'll find a GitHub repository associated with your company. They'll find these credentials for AWS, and then they'll pull them down and they'll try to access them right away. What's really cool about that is if you're using something like S3 Explorer, it's going to generate an error. It's going to say, unable to perform the requested action, can't access this bucket, doesn't exist. What's cool is as soon as they've gotten this little error message, it generates an alert on the back end. It pops up and it says, hey, AWS API key token access request. You can come up with your Canary token reminder, and then the source IP address. Now, this is going to be very, very, very important whenever I start talking about source IP addresses and dealing with IP addresses here in a little bit, but you can absolutely get higher attribution on IP addresses. And I'll talk about how to do that here in a little bit. But yeah, we're seeing this all the time. So people are already putting in that you have people that are in the news all the time. You have banks that are in the news all the time. There was actually a vulnerability that came up that really, really bothered me this week about Zoom. It was a horribly written article, and if somebody can find that article and share it, it's god awful. But they were talking about Zoom is leaking videos of its users online. And if you read the actual article, that's not at all what was going on. What happened is people were recording Zoom sessions, saving Zoom sessions, and then storing them in publicly exposed buckets of like S3 or shares online. And what's really horrible about that is they were blaming Zoom. And they're like, well, Zoom names files with a repeatable pattern. And it's like, dear God. Zoom did not share the videos of people online. It was people sharing their videos online. And it was just kind of like this pig pile. But a similar thing here with the AWS keys, right? You can do GitHub, you can do a number of different places. You can put it up on a web server in your environment. You can drop these fake keys, and as soon as an attacker tries to run them, it's immediately going to get some level of attribution as far as where that attacker actually is. So it's just garbage that it's hitting Zoom as hard as it is. And I think that there's issues with Zoom, no question, but I don't like it whenever it becomes a pig pile as well. All right, so how would an attacker ever get you to run an executable? All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. Because in Canary tokens, we have the ability to do the AWS keys, right? But you also have the ability to take a standalone executable and upload it inside of Canary tokens. And then as soon as somebody tries to run that, let's do strandjs@gmail.com. As soon as somebody tries to run that executable, then it's going to automatically trigger this and automatically create a callback. So here I'm just uploading a custom binary inside of Rufus. Inside of this executable, we're going to create the binary. And some executables work better than others. So it's going to take a second, and then it's going to generate this executable. It's the same executable, and then I save it. And what's really funny about this Rufus is if I try to run it, it's going to pop up a warning message. Just give me a second. I'm going to try to execute it so I can show the running message. So one of the things is Windows Defender is going to pop up and say, this is an unrecognized app. Doesn't matter. It does that all the time. But what I really like is when Rufus runs, if I can get it to execute here. Oh, no, I hit don't run. Damn it. You go downloads, run this one. And I'm going to go more info, run anyway. So check this out. I don't know if you guys can see this. Let me try to share out Rufus's window screen. Here we go. So whenever you try to run it, it pops up and it says, hey, this is not supported. It's not produced by the official developers. So this is pretty cool because Rufus is actually doing some integrity checks of the executable when it runs. That's because some people were actually using it as a backdoor, putting binaries or Trojan backdoor and putting evil binaries inside of it. And at this point, what's funny is it doesn't matter if you hit no or yes, it's already triggered the Canary token at the back end. So you're already going to see an alert pop up. It's going to pop up and say, hey, somebody ran your executable. So what would be some things that you would do that would actually entice an attacker to run that executable? Well, you could call it something like vpnconfig.exe, you could call it sysprep. Any of these different things would be very, very easy for an attacker to see and then automatically crypt. Oh, here, let me stop sharing and sharing my screen. You guys should be able to see my screen now. So the setup, as you said, is just dead simple to use. Just absolutely easy. So somebody asked me what from the roof, they were asking, what's the lack of ceiling? Well, Kerr, this is how we keep our overhead costs low at Black Hills Information Security. There we go. And then I renamed it Free Candy. An attacker was able to actually run it as well. But you can actually go so far as make this real. I love Pandemic Shark said, just call it passwords.exe. Yeah, I don't know. I know a lot of pen testers, me being one, that if I saw that, I'd be like, I'm running that executable because why not? But you can actually go forward. You can make this real. Within OpenVPN, you can actually put in OpenVPN logon scripts. So as soon as somebody runs your OpenVPN, it'll actually automatically run a program of your choosing. So you can see with OpenVPN, you can have a script that pops up and it says PowerShell.exe, execution policy bypass, and then execute a file of your choosing. You can execute full Python scripts for a Linux system. You can run C program files and then run, it's funny as interpreter things, but this is a legitimate executable. This isn't even something from, this isn't even something from Canary at all. You can actually make your VPN automatically execute scripts when somebody downloads and runs this VPN script as well. So that's amazing. I like Ian's, find hot local privilege escalation in your zip code.exe. Well played. Oh, well played, sir.
Hey, John, we've got a great question.
Yeah, shoot it.
What do you think of the argument of leaving things like AWS Canary tokens open on GitHub and how that affects negatively a company's reputation?
It absolutely can. As a matter of fact, it absolutely can. One of the things I think is kind of funny, though, is a lot of news sources, whenever they find something like that, they'll actually go to the company and they'll be like, we would like a comment. And that's a great time for you to actually comment and let them know, no, this is actually a honey token. This is the attacker. This is the pen testing firm. This is the research company that did this. And I think that that's fine. The other thing is about that reputation is as soon as it gets in the news that this company is starting to use deception technologies, trust me, it does absolutely change the attacker's perspective of going after the company. In fact, I wish more companies would do stuff like this as well. We actually had a situation we talk about in the full 2-day version of the class where we were setting this stuff up. This is years ago. We set this up years ago, and we had somebody that found a quote unquote vulnerability on one of our servers and approached me and was kind of a jackass about the whole thing. And I was able to say, well, here's your IP address. This is your host name of your machine. This is geolocation within 20 meters of where you're at. And the attacker was basically like, well, touche, and never went public with it as well. So yeah, you can actually do this, but it's kind of a conversation that you need to have in your organization. Whether or not you want to put this stuff public or not is really up to you. So, all right, any other questions? Rook just said, I prefer to leave the tokens on internal machines. And I think that that's a good point too. You're actually using it at that point for incident response. So if an attacker actually pops a computer system, then you can actually have it specifically tied to that compromised computer system. And we're going to talk about that here in a second with documents as well.
Hey, John, one other interrupt. Yeah. We are behind by about 104 questions. So I think some of these questions we might be able to answer after the cast in blog format or something, but there's no way I can get all these back to you in returns of time. So
I think we need to give a round of applause for the people like Kent and Egypt and people that are hanging on with us today, because they've done an amazing job keeping up with the questions themselves, especially where you have 1,700 people live. So let's go ahead and let's talk about this here as well. So how do you actually put this someplace that your general user population won't find it? One of the easiest ways that you can do it is you could use robots.txt. I mean, you can identify specific directories where you can put these files and put these things where an attacker will absolutely find them, but your standard user environment or your standard user will never find them. Now, one of the things that you can do as far as getting location on an attacker is you can actually embed with inside of an executable, you can put things in it like netshwlan show networks mode BSSID. This becomes something important from the perspective of geolocation. We don't actually have the full lab associated with geolocation tracking, but I'll talk about Honey Badger here a little bit later, which you can actually create artifacts that as soon as an attacker runs it, it doesn't just do geolocation based on IP address. It does full geolocation based on their wireless networks that are around them, and that's far more accurate as well. Another one of my favorites for this, and once again, we're going through this stuff fast, and we do it as far as labs and stuff in the full 2-day version of the class, is let's say that you have a logon page for a website, right? Let's just do a Google search for logon page and see if we can find a logon page. See what we find. It's the first one that we have. Oh, that's a F5 logon page. Oh, wow. Used to be able to just find these things really easy. But anyway, let's just say you have a logon page, right? One of the things you can do with your logon pages, and maybe somebody can find one real quick and we throw it in, is understand that the adversaries are going to clone your logon page, and they're going to do it for the purposes of spear phishing. So the way most attacks actually work is you can put in create a website, clone a login page, and then you trick the victims that you're attacking to go to this fake login page that looks real. And then as soon as somebody goes to that page, you'll be able to collect their user ID and password. Now, Bruce brought up portal.office.com. I wouldn't necessarily do that because that one doesn't apply. Let's do login.classy.org. There we go. I like that. Let's take that one. I'm taking random links from Discord. Let's see how bad this goes. All right, so here we got a login page. Let's say that we worked at Classy. All right, so if I work at Classy and it says log in with your user ID and your password, but I wanted to know if anybody was ever cloning the login page at classy.org. What you can do is you can embed JavaScript within this login page if you're classy.org. And what happens is as soon as, somebody's giving me Pornhub logins, no. So what happens is as soon as somebody clones this website, it has JavaScript in it that'll cause that server to beacon back as soon as somebody tries to view it or as soon as that server runs. And then you'll be able to identify that specific page that has been cloned, right? So here's some of the ones that we get from BHIS. I got this from Kent and Jordan and D-Rock, where we do have people that are trying to clone websites that we have that are login pages for blackhillsinfosec.com. They're at least accessing it. And in doing this, we can actually get IP address information, and it tries its best to try to geolocate where those IP addresses actually are. Now, we're going to talk about geolocation based on IP address here probably after the next break, because honestly, if you're just doing straight geolocation based on IP address, it doesn't work the best. But there's some cool tricks that you can pull to get far more accurate geolocation based on IP addresses. And we'll talk more about how to do that here in a bit. So let's talk about Word docs. And this is something that BB brought up here in just a little while ago with somebody that was asking questions. And then Rook brought it up as well. So one of the things that you can do is imagine that I have a workstation that is compromised. One of the things you can do is drop a Word document on that workstation that you believe to be compromised with a name like passwords.docx or social security numbers or bank account or routing information .docx as well. And what happens is if an attacker actually sees that document and they pull that document down and they run that document, we can get a certain level of geolocation on those documents. And I did this particular slide was at the last DerbyCon. And I started going down like green eggs and ham, talking about cybersecurity, where it's like, would you run it from a share? Could you run it from a chair? Would you run it from Tor? If the FBI comes, would you open the door? And someone's like, you should redo all of green eggs and ham with nothing but cyber deception and hacks. But no, I haven't had any time to actually do this as well. So what you can do, once again, is use this as an incident response technique. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit after the break about how if you use the canary tokens that are generated from Thinkist, right? Like if I want to generate a new token and we're going to create a token that's a Word document and put in an email address of strandjs@gmail.com and then put in something like and then generate the token, it's going to generate a Word document, and then I can download that Word document, open it, and then it triggers it. And this is going to be a lab that we're going to run here in just a little bit. And I'll talk through some of the things associated with that as well. But if you do this, there's some problems, especially whenever you're dealing with alternative Word document viewers. And so you could do Microsoft Office all day long, but what happens if they're using something like LibreOffice, or if they're dealing with the Linux system and they're using something like AbiWord as well? So we'll talk about how you can hit those particular apps in addition. But yes, this is a fantastic technique that you can use as part of incident response. Okay, so the question was, can you walk through again how port spoof increases the amount of time it takes to do a service discovery scan? Absolutely. So whenever you're looking at a service discovery scan, you do a SYN, they do a SYN-ACK, and then you do an ACK, and then you communicate through a series of ACKs. And I'm not going to do my Mars attacks joke today. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it, folks. But what happens is through that communication, it has to query that service and it has to get some responses from that service. Now, some service banners are very, very easy to work with. Just simply making a port connection to that particular port will give the banner. Some services require additional interrogation with that service to get additional information about that service. So let's say that Nessus finds a service, right? It identifies a service like, let's say, an FTP service from 2001 that is known to be vulnerable. So once it identifies that service, it then has to go through and try a bunch of different checks to see if that service is vulnerable. And that takes a tremendous amount of time whenever you're dealing with systems that may have 65,536 ports on them as well. CPEs, yes, absolutely. There shall be CPEs available to everyone as well. What else? If the attacker were to be suspicious of one of these Word documents, what would be their way of vetting the document before they opened it? So there's a couple of different ways that you can actually do that. The first thing that you can do is you can try to open every single document in something like VI or Notepad++. You open it up with an editor that allows you to see the document metadata itself. And I'll talk about what's going on under the hood. The problem with that is on modern docx files, you can't just simply open it up with a standard text editor. You're going to have to decompress the files, then you're going to have to open up the files. So that adds in a tremendous amount of time. The quickest way that you could do it, though, is you could open it up from Google. And within Google, it will still beacon back sometimes, but it'll come from Google's IP address. So it won't beacon back all the time, and it won't be the attacker's IP address. But this creates an additional problem for the attacker. If they're using something like an online document viewer with something like Google, well, that creates the ability for you to then go to Google with a warrant and say, could we identify who or what account opened the specific file at the specific time? They may listen to you, they may not. When you're dealing with nation state level attackers, they tend to listen a little bit better as well. If you wanted to embed a beacon inside of a Word document by hand without Canary, could you do that? Yes, absolutely. And I'll show you exactly how to do that with Word web bugs as well. I like, what is it? Slenga said Canary tokens didn't make it past Little Snitch. Absolutely right. I like that a lot. Now, so that's really, really cool. Because yeah, then you're getting into like a heightened level of paranoia. But now let's imagine you're an attacker. And let's imagine that you're going through every single Word document. You're going through every single Word document with VI, and you're trying to check the metadata into absolutely everything. Well, that's just awesome, because now it's slowing the attacker down way, way, way down as well. Are there good online scanners for Word and PDF files? Okay, so for Shad, never use PDFs for any level of attribution. The reason why is with most PDFs, if there's any active content whatsoever, they automatically get squashed. PDFs were so bad in the security industry for so long that if there's any level of active content, like if you're looking at like U3D or Flat Decode or anything, it just dies. Okay, so this is important. So somebody brought up that Murder Kitty, I love talking to people in their NIM names. It makes life so much more interesting. Brought up that, hey, Microsoft Word opens in protected mode and doesn't trigger the token. That's correct. That's correct. Now, there's a problem with that. Microsoft, the way that they actually handle the security of dealing with Word documents is anytime you open a Word document for the first time, it's automatically going to go into protected mode. So it has little to do with whether or not the Word document has a problem or not, or whether or not it's a token within the Word document or not. In fact, that's actually irrelevant. The reason why is they've actually set it up so it always goes off. So what happens is that negative feedback mechanism happens all of the time, constantly, and you're basically training your users to ignore that negative feedback mechanism. So let me give you an example. SSL warnings. So how many of your organizations today have legitimate websites that you use that every time they go to that website, it always triggers an alert? It always says TLS SSL error. Do you want to proceed? And your users are just trained to go through it. Kent got it. It's Microsoft Word fatigue, right? So absolutely, an alert only works if it actually means something. If it fires all the time, it doesn't mean anything as well. Robin brought up and said for Word documents, you can still trigger Word frame sets to trigger a callback. So it doesn't matter if the document opens in protected mode or not. And we're going to do the same thing with cascading style sheets and image source tags here in just a little bit. So let's go and let's keep moving here. All right. I love it. I love it. I love it. Whenever you start a text editor war on Discord or anything, it's awesome. So back at DerbyCon, I was playing around with stuff and I needed to work on my slides, and I started writing my slides, like, of course, the morning of at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And my brother, who works with me at BHIS, he was sharing a room with me. And we hadn't done that since like we were small children, right? So it was like bunk beds, which was great. So we got like that Step Brothers type thing going on. And I sent him an email and I'm like, please open this. And of course I went with the default named document, which is randomly named gibberish .docx. And I'm like, open it up, open it up, open it up. And he's like, no, dude, I'm not gonna open this. I'm like, come on, man, open it. He's like, I'm tired. So I'm like jumping on his bed. I'm like, Brian, open the doc, open the doc. And he finally did. So he opened the doc from his computer system and it pops up the canary token. Now, this starts to get really important for trying to understand attribution of threat actors, okay? Because almost anybody that you talk to is going to say, well, IP address attribution is garbage. Okay, stick with me, because when he opened this in Louisville, Kentucky, it popped up and it says, okay, this is where the location of that IP address is for geolocation. So let's talk about DHCP and ISPs. So whenever you're an internet service provider, you're going to have a pool of IP addresses. They're going to be associated with the, you're going to have the IP addresses that are associated with your end users, right? And they're SOHO routers. And it's going to hand out these IP addresses willy-nilly, all right? That's DHCP. It's dynamic. It's the D. So what happens is they don't even bother really trying to do any geolocation on those IP addresses in that DHCP pool. And many times the pool that is assigned to their different customers isn't really all that accurate either. So we were all the way over here in downtown Louisville, and it said that it put us, what is it, West Bushel by Good Haven Country Club. It's probably off by a good 3 or 4 miles with that as well. So what we've discovered over the years is, instead of trying to do geolocation based on the actual IP address, what you do is you trace route to that IP address, or as the cool kids say, you trace your T to that IP address, right? So you trace route to that IP address, and then you take the next to last routing hop. You take that IP address and you geolocate that IP address. So you geolocate one IP address back, and that IP address is actually the last routing hop before the endpoint, which in this particular situation was the IP address of the hotel that we were actually staying on as well. So while your internet service providers don't do a really, really great job of doing geolocation of like the endpoint DHCP IP addresses, they tend to be far more accurate on the routing hops, the last routing hop before that point. And we were in the hotel, where were we? About 1 block off. So we were here at the Hyatt Regency, and it geolocated us here at the little red dot. Now that is within 2 blocks of geolocation. Why next to last? So Frank the Tank, the reason why you go next to last is because the DHCP IP address pools, they basically are very much, they don't care, but their actual routers, they do care about. So when you look at the points of presence and the routers for the ISP, they actually do far more accurate geolocation in that situation as well. So Rob Michael 2854 basically shared the Tracer T video, which is cool as well. So you get a little bit better accuracy with that. So it doesn't work all that well though if you're actually using this and you're trying to use this in something like a Linux-based computer system. So what you can do is, instead of doing the instead of just doing the standard stuff that comes off of Canary Token, you can jump in and you can actually edit your Word documents directly. So some people were wondering what goes on under the hood for some geolocation documents. So I'm going to jump on over to my ADHD system here. There we go. And this is actually a lab. It's under attribution, and it's called Web Bug Server. I'm not going to go through the entirety of the lab, but I am going to go through and show you what the Word documents actually look like underneath the hood. So if we open up a command prompt, and I cd into opt web bug server, type ls, you can see that there's a bunch of HTML files in here. And what many people don't understand with is, some people are like, you're very consistent with your previous videos in the same subject. It's almost like I've done this before a lot, right? And Trevor Forget for DerbyCon. So if you actually go into this directory and you open up the actual document itself with VI, webbug.doc, there we go, you'll see that there's actually HTML. Microsoft Word is a browser. It's a very, very limited browser, but it is a browser. And this is not what you would actually put inside of the document itself. This is actually the metadata and everything collected. So you wouldn't open up Microsoft Word and type in HTML, head, link rel, style sheet. No. You would create the document from scratch with a text editor like VI or Vim. That would be fine. I would accept Vim. Pico, yeah, sure. Go WordStar. Sure, whatever. Or Ashton Tate framework, right? If we're going way back in WordStar, we got to bring up Ashton Tate software. So if you look, Microsoft Word actually honors cascading style sheets, and it also honors image source tags as well. So you can put in these image source tags, and what happens is the Word document, it will actually fire and try to image that, open up that image source tag. Assimilated said add in some JavaScript. You can't. JavaScript does not work very well whenever you're using Microsoft Word. It's not that cool. It's cool, but it's not actually executing full JavaScript in HTML5 cool. So whenever somebody opens up this Word document, if they're using like a different word processor like AbiWord or LibreOffice and even some versions of Apple TextEdit, it will make a callback. We may not actually get the user agent string for some of these, but it will actually make the callback itself so that you can get some identification as far as who's actually making that callback. Now, the story behind this and how we actually initially came up with this was kind of interesting. The first time I ever saw this commercially in a product, it was in Core Impact years and years ago, and it was specifically used for pen testing and doing spear phishing campaigns. Core Impact had the ability to generate a unique string for every single user that you sent a document to through Core Impact. So if somebody opened a document, you could identify exactly who it was that actually opened up that document as well. We actually did this years before when we were working at a classified facility. We had a program where it was a SAP-SAR program, and a SAP is a special access program. And it's funny because anybody with a clearance, whenever you start talking about special access programs, they get all nervous, they start touching their nose. Get over it, it's okay. It's not a data leak for me to talk about that I worked on a classified program, as long as I don't mention the program itself. So what happened on this program is it was an isolated program that was it was a relatively small office. And a special access program is, people say it's sometimes above top secret, and that's not true. Whenever you're looking at classification levels, you'll have secret, you'll have top secret, you'll have secret TSSCI, which is sensitive compartmentalized information. And then you'll also have special access programs, which means you have to have a classification level, at least to the classification level of the program, and you have to have a need to know associated with that program. So you just don't get access to that program because you have a clearance. You have to get read into that specific program. And also a lot of SAP networks are completely isolated from even classified networks as well. Well, we had a user who we believed was taking classified documents out of the special access program and were taking them home. And the question was, how were we going to try to catch the user? Not knowing exactly who the user was. Would we stop everybody? And would we have them empty out their pockets? We could, but that may tip off the person. Like the one day that they don't do it, we're stopping everyone and we're having them empty their pockets. Well, then they know not to do it anymore. So what we did is we were able to actually drop or edit, rather, a whole bunch of different documents that were part of that project. And we were able to modify those documents so that they would call back. Specifically, they were calling back to a domain, and we had control of the network in the SAP program that we could actually put a DNS entry for that domain. So it would basically come back to our server within the SAP program network. But we also registered the same domain outside of the classified network on the open internet. By the way, the hardest thing about this entire project was getting that domain registered and getting it used in the SAP program and in the unclassified world. Pro tip, if you ever want to do that, register the domain unclassified first, use it for a little while, and then use the domain in the SAP program. Don't ever register a domain and like set it up in DNS in a SAP program and then try to get it out. It creates problems. Start unclassified and then migrate. It's much easier to do it that way. And sure enough, it took about a week. We had a user that took a document out of the SAP program. They then opened the document at home. We got a beacon, got the IP address, got a warrant, and we were able to have a nice little heart-to-heart and a cup of tea with the person that was doing that as well. So that's a cool way that you can use this. So if you believe that there's documents that are getting stolen, you can actually dig into it a lot deeper. These are just some of the things that you can actually do and you can pull up as well. I talked about Cred Defense Toolkit, and you can actually use Cred Defense Toolkit to actually detect Kerberoasting style attacks. Cred Defense Toolkit is actually covered in the 2-day version of the class, but I want to close out with a couple of things as we're shutting down this session, and then we're going to open it up to general questions and then do it as quickly as we possibly can. So the first thing is, I love it when I'm going through pen test reports, folks, and I see this, okay? Whenever I see someone and whenever I see a pen tester and even a BHIS tester and they hit honeypots, or if they, here, let me share the right document so you guys can see the Kerberoasting stuff. So whenever I see in a report that a customer had some type of cyber deception in the network, it makes my life just so much better. And you guys should be catching up and seeing my slides here in just a second. And that's amazing. We'll talk about Cred Defense Toolkit and the 2-day version of this class in a lot more detail because these are things that you can implement relatively quickly. So let me stop sharing and then start sharing again. So let me know whenever you all see Kerberoasting as well. So it's updating. There we go. We're all good. Turning it off and on again. Works again. The reason why I like this so much is we're starting to see it more and more. I still don't think that we see it enough in most of our pen tests, but we're seeing it more and more every single month that goes by. And the whole point of this session that we have today, and the whole point of what we're doing with the 2-day class is we're trying to start a conversation with people, start a conversation with organizations about how can we come up with novel approaches of defense that are not relying us doing the exact same tired stuff that we have been doing for decades. And to be honest, a lot of these cyber deception techniques have been around for a really, really long time, but we're seeing organizations just now opening up to the idea of using them because some of them are so effective. So, you know, some really, really basic ones, like the one that we talked about for Active Directory, creating a fake user account and then just alerting on it, that's going to detect almost every C2 pivot that happens. And in fact, if the pen tester doesn't do a password spray, I'd even go so far as to say that that pen tester was probably negligent because the attackers do those types of things. So this is cool. When we get this alert and then we have to put into our report, multiple hosts on the domain were installed as traps. Activities conducted by BHIs revealed these traps were vulnerable to multiple insecurities and made tempting targeting. Interaction with these hosts triggered alerts to the customers reported about the test. Now, we do like to say these should not be relied on as the sole source of protection. They do provide an added layer of defense. And I love it. There's nothing that makes me happier than getting a pen tester that calls me and is crying about cyber deception. I always try to get them to collect their tears and ship them to me because it makes the best wine.